Cecilia gave birth to twin girls, one dark-skinned, the other fair white skin with green eyes, a miracle that should have brought joy, but instead it shattered her world. Her husband, Robert, accused her of cheating right in the delivery room and walked away, never to return. Alone and heartbroken, Cecilia raised her daughters through hardship, cleaning classrooms by day and scrubbing floors at night. She even sold her only wedding gold ring to keep them fed during a bitter winter. People laughed, calling her cursed, asking why she didn't give up. But Cecilia never quit. Years later, those same daughters became leaders, one a military hero, the other a brilliant professor. But just when life seemed perfect, the man who abandoned them came crawling back, dying and begging for help. What happens next will leave you speechless. This is a true story of sacrifice, strength, and the love that never gave up, even when the world turned its back. Watch till the end, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. To our returning subscribers, thank you for being part of this journey. Mama Cecilia and Robert Marcus were the kind of couple that turned heads, not because they were flashy or loud, but because their love had a quiet glow that wrapped around them like a favorite old song. Together, they were Black American love, at its finest, graceful, resilient, and deeply rooted in shared purpose. They first crossed paths during a Black History Month heritage tour in Washington, D.C. Cecilia, a passionate educator from Baltimore, had organized a group of her middle school students to attend the event. Robert, a traveling photographer known for capturing soulful portraits and twilight cityscapes, was there working on a documentary series titled Blacklight: Faces of Heritage. They met under the shadow of the Frederick Douglass Memorial. Students gathered around her, his camera dangling from his neck. One shared smile over a James Baldwin quote was all it took for a connection to spark. By the end of that day, they were no longer strangers. Their bond deepened quickly as they discovered a mutual love for the arts, community, and storytelling. Cecilia often spent her weekends tutoring children in underserved neighborhoods, using poetry and storytelling to help them find their voices. Robert would tag along sometimes, capturing raw, powerful images of the young minds she helped shape. His lens adored her, not just in photos but in life. She, in turn, admired the way he saw beauty in the world, especially in overlooked places, rusting fire escapes, wrinkled hands, children's chalk drawings on cracked sidewalks. Their wedding was small, tucked away in a garden courtyard, with a jazz trio playing softly in the background. No grand gestures, no glittering chandeliers, just family, close friends, and the sound of vows spoken with sincerity and love. "We're going to live a life filled with stories," Robert whispered to her that night. And they did. From the shores of Ghana to the mountains of Jamaica and the cobbled streets of Florence, they traveled not for luxury, but for learning. They brought back carved figurines, hand-woven fabrics, recipes passed down from grandmothers, and tales of people they met. Every trip was a new thread woven into the colorful tapestry of their life together. Their modest home was a museum of memories, each wall, each shelf, a quiet testament to places they'd been and dreams they held. But more than anything, they dreamt of raising a family, one filled with love, wisdom, culture, and purpose. They talked about giving their children the kind of life rooted in dignity, knowledge, and compassion. Cecilia would often imagine their child reading books on their lap, while Robert imagined photographing their milestones. First steps, first piano recital, first protest march. Their love was more than romance. It was legacy in motion. Joy swept into their home like spring wind the moment Cecilia found out she was pregnant. Her laughter bubbled from the kitchen to the porch as she held the test in shaking hands. Robert was in the living room editing photos when she burst in, eyes wide, voice trembling with happiness. "We're going to be parents," she whispered. He dropped the camera. Tears flooded their eyes as they held each other, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Every dream they had spoken aloud, late-night talks about legacy, culture, and bedtime stories, now seemed within reach. And then came the second surprise. Twins. 2 heartbeats flickering on the ultrasound screen. Cecilia squeezed Robert's hand so tightly he winced. "Double the blessings," she said, voice thick with emotion. The news spread through their community like wildfire. The neighbors on Willow Street brought flowers. Cecilia's students drew baby-themed art and plastered her classroom door with it. At the local rec center, her best friends organized a baby shower that looked like a quilt of black love. Hand-sewn blankets, onesies with Malcolm X and Maya Angelou quotes, jars of homemade shea butter, and lullaby CDs mixed with gospel and jazz. Elders came with prayers. Teenagers offered babysitting pledges. Their village stood strong. Cecilia glowed throughout her pregnancy. Full cheeks, radiant skin, and a peace in her eyes that came from feeling seen, loved, and protected. Robert documented every moment, her hands cradling her belly, her silhouette at sunset, her quiet smile while reading baby books aloud to the bump. They chose names with intention. Rosa, after Rosa Parks, for strength. Jada, from a poem Cecilia once wrote about light and beauty, but nothing prepared them for what came next. The day of the birth arrived with a quiet snow falling outside. At 6:32 a.m., Rosa was born, brown-skinned with soft curls and a sleepy scowl that reminded everyone of Cecilia. A minute later, Jada entered the world with a cry so piercing it felt like she was singing her own arrival. But when the nurses cleaned her and placed her gently beside her sister, the room changed. Jada had pale skin, almost porcelain, with soft blonde curls and brilliant green eyes that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. She looked nothing like Robert, nothing like Cecilia. The delivery room fell into a hush. Robert's smile faded, his brows furrowed. He took one step back, then another, until his back met the wall. "What is this?" he muttered. His voice, once warm and smooth, turned sharp and brittle. He looked at Cecilia, whose face was frozen in joy and confusion. "You cheated," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like broken glass. "What?" Cecilia gasped, still cradling Rosa, to her chest. "You cheated on me. You had an affair. Don't lie." His voice grew louder, angrier. A nurse stepped between them, gently pushing Robert back. Cecilia shook her head violently. "No, Robert, no. There's a scientific explanation. Genetics are complex. Sometimes traits skip generations. It happens." "I don't. I want science," he growled. "I want the truth." His words left a deeper wound than any blade could. Nurses whispered in corners. The doctor tried to speak, to explain recessive genes, to offer insight, but Robert had already stepped out of the room. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed in Cecilia's soul. Alone in her hospital bed, she looked at her daughters, Rosa, already dozing peacefully, and Jada, alert and blinking. One mirrored her, the other a mystery. But she knew one thing. She loved them both. Fiercely, no matter what. The joy of new life now sat tangled in shadows. A celebration had become a storm, and Cecilia, wrapped in both pain and purpose, now faced the journey of motherhood alone. A week after Rosa and Jada came into the world, the door to Cecilia's life slammed shut in the most permanent of ways. Robert filed for divorce. No conversation, no counseling, no second chances, just cold-typed words stamped with the state's seal and delivered by a man who looked more uncomfortable than the envelope he held. Cecilia sat on the edge of her couch, the twins sleeping nearby as her world slowly unraveled. She held the letter in trembling hands, rereading the lines that marked the end of everything she thought was forever. He wanted out. He demanded a DNA test, and yet when the court scheduled it, Robert didn't even show up, twice. His absence spoke louder than any accusation. His mind was made up, forged in betrayal, fired in doubt, and sealed by pride. He wanted to believe the worst. And that, Cecilia realized, was the most devastating truth of all. He left. No goodbyes, no final embrace, no picture of the daughters he once dreamed of. Cecilia stood at the window that night, the divorce papers folded on the coffee table, and stared into the dark. The snow outside was beginning to melt, but inside, everything felt frozen. Her heart, her trust, her hope. She remembered the first time Robert kissed her, how he cupped her face with such care, like she was glass, sacred and rare. That memory now felt like a lie wrapped in ribbon. Every photograph he'd taken of her, every travel journal they'd filled together, every "I love you" whispered in the still of night. All of it now echoed with betrayal. Cecilia didn't cry right away. The pain was too deep, too sudden. Instead, she moved like a ghost through their once warm home. She folded the baby clothes they'd picked out together. She passed the travel souvenirs still sitting on the bookshelf. She avoided their wedding album, still open on the table from months ago. The house was filled with proof that love had once lived there. Now all it did was haunt her. The twins stirred in their crib. She turned to them, her daughters, her reason to breathe. Rosa blinked sleepily and reached for her finger. Jada, ever observant, stared at her mother with those bright green eyes. Different, yes, but hers. Completely, beautifully hers. Cecilia knelt beside them, tears finally forming. "I will never let the world make you feel less than whole," she whispered. "No matter what you look like, no matter who stays or leaves." That night, after putting the girls to bed, Cecilia did something she hadn't done since the divorce. Papers arrived. She picked up her journal. She wrote not as a woman broken, but as a mother rebuilding. Page by page, she poured her pain, her promises, and her prayers onto paper. She wrote about betrayal, yes, but also resilience. About love lost, but also love transformed. And she made a vow. Never again would she give her heart so completely. Never again would she trust a man with her soul. The scars Robert left behind were too deep, too raw. Her heart was not a home for anyone else now, only for Rosa and Jada. Love had once felt like sunlight. Now it felt like fire, and she would walk through it, alone, but alive. Cecilia quickly learned that love alone couldn't keep the lights on. With Robert gone and no child support coming in, survival became a daily war. But Cecilia had always been a fighter, even if the world mistook her gentleness for fragility. She poured every ounce of herself into raising Rosa and Jada. Gone were the evenings spent grading papers with a glass of tea beside her. Gone were the weekends curled up reading novels or singing in church choirs. Now her days began at dawn and ended deep into the night. She scrubbed cafeteria floors at a nearby school, then clocked into her second job as a nighttime cleaner at a downtown office complex. Her back ached, her hands blistered, but her daughters never went hungry. That was her vow. On especially hard nights, when the heater struggled against the bite of winter, Cecilia would rock the girls to sleep and stare at her empty ring finger. The wedding band had been the last piece of her old life. She sold it one February, when the fridge was empty and Jada had begun asking why their milk was always watered down. "It's just how Mommy makes it last longer," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That winter was sharp and cruel, but the spring that followed brought a deeper storm. Rosa, the quieter of the two girls, had always been prone to fevers and fatigue, but at age 7, the symptoms grew worse. She fainted one morning on the way to school. At the hospital, the doctors murmured in hushed tones, their faces grave. "A rare immune disorder," one finally said. "She needs long-term treatment, specialized care. It won't be cheap." Cecilia's knees nearly buckled. Her savings were gone. She was behind on rent. Her credit card was maxed, but Rosa needed her. So Cecilia did what she always had. She fought. She took a third job cleaning weekend offices. She ate one meal a day to stretch their food stamps. She sold her mother's old jewelry and the antique radio Robert had once gifted her on their first anniversary. Still, it wasn't enough. That's when the community stepped in. Again, neighbors showed up with grocery bags. Former students brought by warm meals and hand-drawn get-well cards. Cecilia's church organized a fundraiser. Even strangers, moved by the story of the single mother who never stopped working, contributed quietly, slipping envelopes of cash into her mailbox. They came with casseroles, hugs, and prayers. And Cecilia, though tired beyond measure, never stopped whispering thank you. Through countless hospital nights and long days of treatment, Rosa fought. Her little body, frail but determined, seemed to draw strength from her mother's unwavering presence. Cecilia never missed a moment. Not one appointment, not one blood test, not one tear. She read to Rosa from old books, braided her hair gently when the medication made it fall out, and sang lullabies to drown out the beeping machines. And then, one morning, Rosa smiled. Her fever broke. Her appetite returned. Her laugh, soft and clear, returned to their tiny apartment. Against all odds, Rosa survived. Cecilia fell to her knees in the hallway that night, clutching the edges of her daughter's favorite blanket and weeping for the first time in months. Not from fear, but from relief. Rosa's strength became her mother's pride. In her daughter's eyes, Cecilia saw not just survival, but legacy, a reflection of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear shed in silence. And though life was still hard, Cecilia found something steadier than comfort, purpose. She had walked through fire and come out holding grace. Time, like a river, flowed faster than Cecilia ever anticipated. One moment, she was packing lunch boxes and checking for homework. The next, she was ironing caps and gowns. High school flew by in a blur of exams, late-night study sessions, parent-teacher, meetings and after-school programs. Rosa and Jada had grown into bright, determined young women, different in every way, yet bound by love and the quiet example of their mother's strength. Jada was the bold one, sharp-minded and fearless, always ready with a plan. She had her father's intensity and her mother's grit. When she spoke about joining the military, Cecilia was hesitant, but she saw the fire in her daughter's eyes. Jada didn't just want to wear a uniform. She wanted to lead, to defend, to shape policy. Her dream was bigger than any battlefield. Rosa, in contrast, was quiet and deeply empathetic. She loved books, science documentaries, and asking endless questions. Her teachers adored her. She helped tutor struggling students and spent weekends volunteering at the local library. Rosa had a heart for knowledge and a desire to teach. She once told Cecilia, "I want to be the teacher that changes someone's life, like you did for me." College, however, loomed like a mountain. Tuition fees were Everest-sized, and Cecilia's financial resources were almost non-existent. Every dollar had gone into surviving Rosa's treatments, keeping the heat on and food in the fridge. What little she'd managed to squirrel away in a coffee tin under the sink had already gone toward college applications and testing fees. Then came the hardest decision of all. In a drawer, hidden in an old Bible, lay the last piece of her heritage, a golden necklace passed down from her grandmother, who had received it from hers. That necklace had crossed oceans, lived through war and peace, and had rested on the necks of women who prayed, worked, and endured. It was a piece of history, of identity, and Cecilia sold it. She didn't tell the girls. She didn't cry when she handed it over to the pawnshop clerk. She simply nodded, accepted the cash, and walked away with her past traded for her daughter's future. Then, as if fate had been watching all along, blessings arrived. Scholarship letters came in yellow envelopes that felt like wings. Rosa had been accepted into Emory University, her dream school, with a full ride. Jada earned placement in a top-tier military academy in Los Angeles, recognized not just for her grades, but for her leadership in community cadet programs. Cecilia wept, this time with joy. The day she dropped them off, one after the other, she held them both tightly and whispered, "Fly, but never forget your wings were made from sacrifice." Neither girl saw the tears that followed as their mother drove back alone, but they felt them in every call, every care package, every sleepless prayer she uttered on their behalf. Years passed. Rosa rose through academia, earning her doctorate in education and returning to Emory as a respected professor. She lectured with the same passion Cecilia once used to read bedtime stories. Jada climbed the ranks of the military with a fierceness that turned heads. She became a rising voice in defense policy, often quoted in national debates, respected by generals and senators alike. Where others saw success, Cecilia saw seeds that had bloomed from pain and perseverance. Her girls had soared, and though she now walked alone, her legacy lived, not in medals or degrees, but in the strength she passed down to Rosa and Jada, a strength forged in silence, sacrifice, and unshakable love. While Cecilia was piecing together a life built on sacrifice and love, far from her modest home, Robert Marcus was watching his own world fall apart. The man who once captured sunsets with passion and poise had lost the fire in his lens. His photography, business, once thriving with gallery showings and wedding gigs, slowly dried up. First came the economic slump, then came the missed deadlines, and finally, the clients who never returned. Robert blamed the industry, blamed technology, blamed everyone but himself. When he remarried, he thought he was beginning anew. Her name was Lydia, younger, lively, and charming. But charm, Robert learned too late, did not equal loyalty. She spent extravagantly, controlled every dime, and left him emotionally bankrupt long before she drained his bank account. Over the years, Robert discovered messages, then photographs, then outright confessions of her infidelity. He stayed, believing things would change, but Lydia didn't change. She left him for someone younger and wealthier, leaving Robert with overdue bills, foreclosure notices, and silence. Then came the diagnosis, kidney failure. At first he brushed it off. Maybe it was stress, maybe bad luck. But as the months passed and the hospital visits increased, the truth could no longer be ignored. He was dying, slowly, painfully, and worse, he was dying alone. Doctors told him his best chance was a transplant. But every call to family ended in disappointment. No matches, no volunteers. And that's when the past, the one he had buried deep beneath anger and denial, clawed its way back into his thoughts. He hadn't spoken Cecilia's name in years, hadn't seen the twins since the day he walked out. But now, desperation outweighed pride. In a dimly lit room, hands trembling, he hired a private investigator. "Find them," he whispered. "My daughters." Weeks later, the investigator returned with more than just names and addresses. He came with the truth, undeniable and backed by science. The DNA results had finally been completed, years too late, but definitive. Rosa and Jada were his biological daughters, no question, no margin for doubt. The pigment difference that had fueled his accusations and destroyed his marriage was a result of a rare genetic occurrence, a phenomenon sometimes seen in twins, especially in mixed ancestry backgrounds. Robert stared at the papers in disbelief. All these years, all the pain he had caused, the family he had thrown away, the love he had refused to believe in. He thought about Jada, the bold girl with piercing eyes, about Rosa, the quiet one with a gentle smile. He remembered Cecilia's face, hurt, shocked, pleading for understanding in that sterile delivery room. He had been wrong, fatally wrong, and now, in a twist of cruel irony, his life hung in the balance, and only the daughters he had rejected might hold the key to saving it. He sat alone in his living room, the light dim, the silence loud. On the coffee table lay the DNA report, a picture of his former life in Cecilia's arms, and a glass of water he hadn't touched. Regret settled on him like dust, thick, suffocating, impossible to shake. He picked up a pen and began to write a letter to Cecilia, to Rosa, to Jada, a plea for forgiveness, a prayer for a second chance, a hope, slim as it may be, for redemption. Rosa stood at the front of the lecture hall, marker in hand, halfway through a discussion on genetic inheritance when the doors creaked open. She barely glanced up, assuming it was a late student, until the room fell silent. The man who stepped inside looked like a shadow of someone she'd only known through stories and one blurry photo tucked in an old drawer. Gaunt, gray, eyes sunken yet searching. He leaned heavily on a cane, trembling. Her voice faltered. The marker dropped from her fingers. "Rosa," he croaked, breath shallow. I'm your father." Gasps rippled through the hall. Rosa froze. The students stared. She felt her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Was this a cruel joke? But the eyes, those were hers. And the voice, weaker now, but something about it clawed at the edge of memory. The way her mother used to say his name with a mixture of pain and reverence. Robert Marcus. He stepped forward slowly. "I need to speak to you, please." Rosa, rooted in a storm of emotions, managed a whisper. Class dismissed, the room emptied with murmurs and side eyes, but Rosa didn't move. Her knees threatened to buckle. Robert stood inches from her now, holding out a worn envelope, the letter he had written. Inside were his test results, a handwritten apology, and a photo of her as a newborn, tucked in his wallet for years despite his silence. "I was wrong," he said. "I'm on dialysis now. I have no one else. I came to find you, to make peace, and to ask—" "You don't get to ask anything," Rosa cut in, voice sharp now. "You left. You destroyed my mother." Still, he knelt. "I am sorry. Please, I'm dying." The moment shattered something inside Rosa. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just walked out, leaving him collapsed in the echo of her steps. Within 24 hours, the news reached Jada. By evening, a black government SUV pulled up outside Cecilia's modest home in Atlanta. Jada stormed in, still in uniform, medals gleaming on her chest, her face hard. Rosa was already there, quiet and withdrawn. Cecilia, now grayer and slower, stood from her chair. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from memories she had spent years burying. "He came to me," Rosa said simply. "I know," Jada replied. "I saw the hospital report. He's not lying." A knock interrupted them. All three women turned. There he stood, Robert Marcus, thinner than memory, oxygen tube hooked under his nose, holding a paper bag of medications and sorrow. Cecilia looked at him, her face unreadable. "You have some nerve." "I know," he whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. To you all." Jada stepped forward, her voice like steel. "You didn't believe in us. You accused our mother. You vanished." "I did," he nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "And I've regretted it every day. I see you both, strong, brilliant women, all your mother, all her." He knelt again in front of the woman he once loved and the daughters he never raised. "Please," he sobbed. "I don't want to die without making things right. Even if you never forgive me, help me." Cecilia looked down at him. This man who had once lit up her world and later dimmed it with disbelief. She didn't speak. She just reached for Rosa and Jada's hands, clasping them tightly. The silence was thick with pain and possibility. The house sat in stillness after Robert's departure, but tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Jada stood rigid, arms crossed, jaw tight. Rosa paced the living room, chewing her lip. Cecilia sat down slowly, as if the weight of the past had settled into her bones. "He doesn't deserve anything," Jada snapped. "Not a cent, not a tear, not a single breath of mercy." Rosa, ever quiet, looked at her sister. "But what if helping him isn't about deserving? What if it's about us, not him?" Jada turned, eyes blazing. "He left us, Rosa. He left her. You think a few apologies fix that?" It was then Cecilia spoke, her voice low, steady, commanding. "Forgiveness is not weakness," she said, meeting both their eyes. "But trust must be earned." Jada's face softened. Only slightly. Rosa stopped pacing. In that moment, the authority Cecilia once wielded as a teacher, as a mother who'd raised them alone through storm after storm, returned. "I will allow this," she said, "but only on our terms. We will help, but we will not forget." And so the plan unfolded quietly, discreetly. Robert Marcus was admitted to a specialized treatment center 2 towns over. The bills, steep and constant, were paid directly by Rosa and Jada, never under their names. Cecilia handled the logistics, ensuring every doctor's call came through her, not to him. The 3 of them controlled the distance with precision, close enough to save a life, far enough to protect their hearts. Rosa, moved by something she couldn't name, stepped up in silence. Tests showed she was a match. The transplant was scheduled quickly. She refused to let the hospital reveal her identity. On the day of surgery, she squeezed her mother's hand. "Are you sure?" Cecilia asked. "Yes," Rosa whispered. "Not for him. For me." The surgery was successful. Robert woke with a new kidney and a second chance. He asked the nurses again and again, "Who was it? Who gave it to me?" They never told. Rosa recovered slowly, supported by Jada, who never once questioned her sister's decision out loud, but the unspoken space between them, between bitterness and grace, widened. Jada carried her fury like armor. Rosa wore her gentleness like a scar. Robert healed, at least physically. He walked more now. He smiled at strangers. He tried to photograph again, though his hands sometimes shook. But he remained emotionally hollow, haunted by what he could never reclaim. One afternoon, he sat in the treatment garden, sunlight on his face, camera on his lap. He took a picture of a robin in flight and thought of Jada, sharp, fearless, untouchable. He captured a quiet puddle beneath an old oak tree and thought of Rosa, deep, soft, quietly powerful. He wept. "I don't deserve you," he whispered to the wind. He never found out who gave him the kidney. Part of him hoped it wasn't either of them, that some stranger's mercy saved him. The truth he feared was heavier, that one of his daughters loved humanity enough to save even the man who'd once abandoned her. But some things he would never be allowed to know. And that was part of the price he had to pay. The years rolled forward like chapters in a book Cecilia never imagined she'd live to read. Time, with all its jagged edges and healing hands, had softened the pain, but sharpened the meaning. Her daughters were grown now, powerful, compassionate, and bold. She was proud not just of them, but of the woman she had become in the process of raising them. Cecilia, now 65, wore her silver-streaked locks like a crown. She still lived in the same modest house, though it had been renovated many times over by grateful neighbors and well-wishers. She still volunteered at the local community center, still showed up with soup and storybooks for children who reminded her of younger versions of Rosa and Jaida. But the world had started to notice her. It began with a local news story, a feature on single mothers who beat the odds. That story caught the eye of a filmmaker in Atlanta. A screenplay followed. Then came auditions, shooting days, and voiceover recordings. And just like that, a film was born, The Color of Love, a biopic capturing Cecilia's sacrifices, her heartbreak, her strength, and her ultimate triumph. The movie premiered at Sundance, bringing people to tears. It won the jury prize for storytelling and cultural impact. Suddenly, Cecilia Marcus became a household name. Reporters called. Universities invited her to speak. Letters came from women across the country, mothers, daughters, widows, survivors, thanking her for living the truth they hadn't found the courage to voice. But Cecilia remained humble. "I'm not a celebrity," she told a journalist. "I'm just a mother who kept showing up." Her 65th birthday became a community affair. A stage was built on the same corner where she once handed out free books to kids with struggling grades. Balloons floated across the sky. Food trucks lined the street. Gospel choirs sang as the sun dipped low. Then came the surprise. The mayor stepped onto the stage, flanked by community leaders and city council members. A large sign was unveiled, Mama Cecilia Way. The crowd erupted into cheers. Children danced in circles. Elders wept openly. Cecilia, overwhelmed, pressed a hand to her chest. Next came Rosa, standing behind the podium in a smart emerald green dress. She adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. "I've read hundreds of books," she began, her voice steady, "but none compare to the chapters my mother wrote with her life. She taught me resilience, sacrifice, and unconditional love. I teach because she did first." She paused, looking at her mother. "She is the strongest woman I've ever known." Then, from the edge of the crowd, came the sharp sound of boots on pavement. Jaida, in full military regalia, medals gleaming, shoulders back, pride in every step. She climbed the stage and stood beside her mother. The crowd fell silent. Jaida raised her hand in a slow, deliberate salute. "America may call me a hero," she said, voice ringing clear. "But this woman, this black woman, is the reason I stand." Cecilia's eyes brimmed with tears. She reached out, pulling both daughters into an embrace that seemed to hold the weight of every sleepless night, every hard-won victory, every scar, and every sunrise. The crowd stood, clapping, shouting, crying. Cecilia closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "We made it." And for the first time in decades, there was no pain in the memory, only love. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon as the last song from the celebration faded. Laughter still lingered in the air, and the scent of barbecue and sweet cake clung to the breeze. Children danced on the newly named Mama Cecilia Way, and old friends hugged like kin. Cecilia sat with Rosa and Jaida on the front steps of their family home, warm cups of tea in hand, glowing in the afterglow of a day that felt like a dream. But then the phone rang. Jaida answered, her posture straightened. "Yes, I'm her daughter," she said, her voice turning clipped and cautious. I see. Thank you for letting us know." She hung up slowly. Rosa looked up. "What is it?" Jada exhaled. "He's gone. Robert Marcus, our father." Cecilia went still. Her cup trembled slightly in her hand, though her face remained unreadable. Rosa's brows knitted. "When?" "Today," Jada said. "A neighbor found him in his apartment. It looks like he died peacefully in his sleep." There was silence. Not the kind weighed down by grief, but by something far more complex. A silence braided with sadness, closure, and the ache of unfinished conversations. "He was alone?" Cecilia finally asked. Jada nodded. "They found a journal by his bed. The last thing he wrote was—" She paused, pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, and read aloud. "They were my daughters. I was the fool. Love had no color, and I let it go." Cecilia closed her eyes, a deep sigh escaping her lips. Rosa, ever the empath, touched her mother's hand. "He knew," she whispered. In the end, he knew. The world wouldn't mourn Robert Marcus with fanfare or headlines. No tributes or obituaries would frame him as a hero. But his final words, passed from his lonely room to their ears, etched a truth that echoed louder than any applause. Love has no color, and fear is never worth the cost of turning away from it. For days, the family wrestled with whether or not to attend the cremation. It was a quiet affair. No flowers, no procession, no family besides the daughters he once denied. But Rosa went. She stood alone at the small, nondescript funeral home and placed a single white rose atop the urn. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply bowed her head and walked away. Jada didn't go, but that night she sat by her mother's side on the porch, staring at the stars in a quiet moment of reflection. "He lost everything," she murmured. "Not because he didn't love us, but because he feared what loving us would mean." Cecilia nodded, her voice steady. "Some people confuse difference with danger. They run from what they don't understand, not realizing they're running from the very thing that could save them." The lesson was not lost on the community either. The story of Robert Marcus, once celebrated, then shamed, then silent, became a cautionary tale. Churches preached on it. Teachers referenced it in classrooms. Families whispered it at dinner tables. A man who once walked away from love out of fear, ignorance, and pride had, in death, taught a generation how to do better. And Cecilia? She didn't speak of him often, but when she did, it was without bitterness. She told her daughters and the children she mentored, "We cannot control what people do with the love we offer, but we can choose to never let the fear of rejection stop us from offering it, because in the end, love remembered always echoes louder than love denied."